The warning came at exactly noon, Earth Standard Time. Every human colony, every outpost, every ship in space received the same message. The voice was cold and mechanical, translated into perfect human languages by advanced alien technology. People of Earth, you have 72 hours to surrender all weapons and submit to hegemony rule. Refuse, and your species will be removed from existence. Admiral Sarah Chen stood in the command center of New Geneva Station, watching the massive alien fleet that had appeared in their system. The ships were huge, each one the size of a city. There were hundreds of them, all pointing their weapons at the human colony below. She had never seen anything so terrifying. "Ma'am, we're getting reports from every human system," her communications officer said. His voice was shaking. "They're everywhere. Earth, Mars, the outer colonies. The aliens have us completely surrounded." Sarah looked at the tactical display. Red dots showed enemy ships around every human world. The numbers were impossible. 10,000 alien warships against barely 300 human vessels. It was not a battle. It was an execution. The alien fleet belonged to something called the Hegemony Council, 12 different alien species that had ruled the galaxy for thousands of years. Humans had heard stories about them, but no one had ever seen them. Until now. Why now? Sarah asked herself. What did we do wrong? Her science officer, Dr. Liu, pulled up data on his screen. The message included a list of our crimes, Admiral. They say we expand too fast. They say we adapt their technology too quickly. They say we're a threat to galactic peace. Sarah laughed, but there was no humor in it. A threat? We've been in space for barely 200 years. We have a few dozen colonies. How are we a threat to an empire that spans the galaxy? But deep down she knew the answer. Humans were different. They learned fast, adapted faster, and never gave up. In 2 centuries, they had spread across dozens of star systems. They had reverse-engineered alien technology and made it better. They had survived wars, disasters, and challenges that would have destroyed other species. Maybe that was exactly what scared the Hegemony Council. Admiral, her tactical officer called out. The alien ships are moving into attack formation. They're not waiting for the deadline. Sarah watched the enemy vessels spread out around New Geneva. Each ship was armed with weapons that could destroy the entire colony in minutes. She had 6 patrol boats and a single frigate. It was hopeless. All ships maintain defensive positions, she ordered. Do not fire unless fired upon. I repeat, do not engage the enemy. It felt like cowardice, but Sarah knew better. Their small fleet would last maybe 5 minutes against those alien monsters. Better to wait and hope for a miracle. The miracle came in the form of an encrypted message that appeared on her private communication channel. The sender was unknown, but the message was clear. Operation Lazarus is active. Maintain defensive positions. Do not engage. The Shadow Protocol will commence in 64 hours. Sarah stared at the message. She had never heard of Operation Lazarus or the Shadow Protocol, but something about the message felt official. Military, like it came from the highest levels of human command. Ma'am, Dr. Liu said quietly, I'm picking up strange energy readings from Earth. Sarah switched her display to show the Sol system. Earth was surrounded by the largest concentration of alien ships. Over 2,000 vessels formed a perfect sphere around humanity's homeworld. But there was something else. Energy signatures coming from the planet's polar regions. What kind of energy? Sarah asked. Unknown, Dr. Liu replied. But it's massive. Whatever's generating it is using more power than our entire colony. Similar reports came in from other human commanders. Strange energy readings. Mysterious messages about operations that nobody had heard of. And always the same order. Do not engage the enemy. Hours passed. The alien fleets remained in position, like predators waiting for the right moment to strike. Human civilians on dozens of worlds looked up at the sky and saw death hanging over their heads. In the command centers of human military bases, officers tried to make sense of the situation. They had contingency plans for alien contact, but nothing like this. The enemy was too powerful, too many, too organized. It was like the entire galaxy had decided that humanity needed to die. Sarah received regular updates from other commanders. Admiral Volkov at Alpha Centauri reported 300 alien ships in his system. Commander Jackson at Wolf 359 counted over 500. The pattern was the same everywhere. Overwhelming force, impossible odds, and mysterious energy readings from Earth. They're toying with us, her tactical officer said. They could have destroyed us already. Why are they waiting? Sarah thought about it. Maybe they want us to suffer first. Or maybe they're waiting for Earth to make the first move. Earth's not going to surrender, Dr. Liu said with certainty. Not after everything we've been through to get here. He was right. Humans had fought for every inch of space they occupied. They had survived alien diseases, hostile environments, and their own mistakes. They had built colonies on worlds that should have killed them and made them into homes. Surrender was not in human nature. As the deadline approached, the alien fleets began to move closer to human worlds. Some opened fire on unmanned satellites and space stations, destroying them with casual ease. It was a demonstration of power, a reminder that humanity existed only because the Hegemony Council allowed it. But the energy readings from Earth continued to grow stronger. Sarah found herself staring at the tactical display, trying to understand what was happening. Earth was the key to everything. Whatever Operation Lazarus was, whatever the Shadow Protocol meant, it was all connected to humanity's homeworld. "Ma'am," her communications officer called out, "we're receiving a system-wide broadcast. All human colonies." The message came from Earth. A man in military uniform appeared on the screen. Sarah didn't recognize him, but he wore the insignia of a fleet admiral. Behind him was a command center unlike anything she had ever seen. "This is Admiral Harrison, Earth Defense Command," the man said. "In approximately 60 hours, the Hegemony Council will learn why humanity has spread across the galaxy. They will discover that we are not the helpless prey they believe us to be. All colonial forces are ordered to maintain defensive positions and await further instructions. Earth remembers her children. Earth protects her own." The message ended, but Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. Earth Defense Command was supposed to have been disbanded 50 years ago. Who was Admiral Harrison? What was that strange command center? And what did he mean when he said the aliens would learn why humanity had spread across the galaxy? The energy readings from Earth's polar region spiked again. This time the readings were so strong that they registered on sensors across the entire Sol system. Something massive was powering up beneath Earth's surface. Something that had been hidden from the galaxy for decades. Sarah looked at her small fleet, then at the alien armada threatening her colony. For the first time since the ultimatum arrived, she felt something other than fear. She felt hope. The countdown continued. 64 hours until the Shadow Protocol would commence. Whatever that meant, Sarah had the feeling that the Hegemony Council was about to discover that humanity was full of surprises. The alien ships hung in space like dark clouds, waiting for their moment of victory. They had no idea that humanity's greatest secret was about to be revealed. Earth had been preparing for this day for longer than anyone imagined. The hidden fleet was about to emerge. Dr. Marcus Webb had spent 30 years digging through alien ruins. He was supposed to be retired, living quietly on Mars, but the emergency had brought him back to Earth. Now he stood in a briefing room deep underground, surrounded by military officers who needed to understand what humanity was about to unleash. The first ruins were discovered on Kepler 442b. Webb began, activating a holographic display. "We thought it was just an archaeological find. Ancient alien civilization, dead for millions of years. We were wrong." The hologram showed a massive city buried beneath layers of rock and ice. The architecture was impossible, with buildings that seemed to bend space around them. Corridors that led to rooms bigger than they should be. Technology that violated every law of physics. "We found similar ruins on 16 other worlds," Webb continued. "All of them had the same characteristics, the same technology, the same symbols. We called them the Umbral Dominion." General Martinez, head of Earth Defense Command, leaned forward. "Tell them about the technology, Doctor." Webb switched the display to show strange devices pulled from the ruins. They looked like crystals and metal twisted together in patterns that hurt to look at. "The Umbral technology doesn't work like anything we know. It doesn't use energy the way we understand it. Instead, it manipulates something they called shadow space." "What's shadow space?" asked Colonel Hayes, one of the younger officers. "Imagine reality has a shadow," Webb explained. "A place that exists alongside our dimension but separate from it. The Umbral could move between normal space and shadow space at will. They could exist in both places at the same time or in neither place at all." The room fell silent. The implications were staggering. Technology that could make ships invisible, untouchable yet still capable of affecting the real world. It was like having the power of ghosts. "Our best scientists have spent 80 years studying this technology," General Martinez said. "We've built facilities in secret locations around the world, underground complexes that the public has never seen. We've been preparing for this day since we first discovered the ruins. Webb nodded grimly. The Shadow Protocol isn't just a weapon. It's a complete fleet that exists partially in shadow space. Ships that can phase between dimensions. The energy readings Admiral Chen detected are the dimensional generators powering up. One of the officers raised his hand. If this technology is so powerful, why didn't we use it before? Why let the Hegemony Council think we're weak? Because we weren't ready, General Martinez replied. And because we hoped we'd never need it. The Umbral technology is dangerous. Every time we use it, we risk tearing holes in reality itself. Webb brought up new images on the hologram. These showed the hidden facilities beneath Earth's surface. Massive caverns filled with impossible machinery, ships that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions at once, thousands of personnel who had sworn oaths of secrecy that went beyond anything in human history. Project Lazarus began as a defensive measure, Webb explained. We knew that humanity would eventually encounter hostile aliens. We needed an advantage that nobody would expect, something that would make them think twice about attacking Earth. The hologram showed the Shadow Fleet in detail. 5,000 ships of various sizes, all incorporating Umbral technology. They didn't look like normal human vessels. Their hulls shifted between solid metal and translucent shadow. Their weapon systems could fire across dimensional barriers. Their shields could phase in and out of existence. The crews are volunteers, General Martinez said, people who knew they might never return to normal space once they entered shadow space. Every person in the Shadow Fleet has trained for decades to use this technology. Admiral Harrison entered the briefing room. He was the man who had sent the message to the colonies. Up close, he looked older than he had on the transmission. The weight of command had aged him. The Hegemony Council made a mistake, Harrison said without preamble. They assumed we were like every other species they've encountered. Predictable. Limited. They gave us an ultimatum thinking we'd surrender or die with dignity. He gestured to the holographic display showing the Shadow Fleet. They have no idea that we've been preparing for this confrontation since we first left Earth. Every colony, every exploration mission, every archaeological dig has been part of a larger plan. Webb switched the display to show a galactic map. Red dots marked human colonies. Blue lines connected them to each other and back to Earth. But there were other connections, hidden ones that passed through shadow space. We can move the entire Shadow Fleet to any human system in minutes, Webb explained. The Hegemony Council thinks they have us trapped, but we've built a network that spans the galaxy through shadow space. We can be anywhere, anytime. Colonel Hayes looked worried.
What about the risks you mentioned?
The damage to reality? Webb's expression darkened. Every jump through shadow space weakens the barriers between dimensions. Use it too much and things start bleeding through. The Umbral Dominion disappeared for a reason. We think they used their technology so extensively that they tore holes in space-time itself. But we don't have a choice, General Martinez said firmly. The Hegemony Council has given us 3 options: surrender, die, or fight back with everything we have. Surrender means slavery or extinction. Dying with dignity means our children never get to see the stars. Fighting back means using the Shadow Protocol. Harrison activated his personal communicator. All stations, this is Admiral Harrison. Begin final preparations for Shadow Protocol activation. All dimensional generators to full power. All Shadow Fleet personnel to battle stations. The energy readings from Earth's polar regions spiked again. In hidden facilities around the world, machines that had been built using impossible alien technology began to tear holes in space-time itself. The barriers between normal space and shadow space grew thin. How long until activation? Webb asked. Harrison checked his chronometer. 24 hours. The Hegemony Council will begin their attack in 12 hours, based on their previous ultimatums. They always strike early to demonstrate their power. As if summoned by his words, alerts began flashing on communication panels around the room. Reports were coming in from human colonies across the galaxy. The alien fleets were moving into final attack positions. Some had begun firing on human satellites and unmanned stations. They're not waiting for the deadline, Colonel Hayes observed. They never do, Harrison replied. The Hegemony Council believes in showing overwhelming force. They want us to watch our outer defenses fall before they demand our final surrender. Webb looked at the tactical displays showing alien fleets surrounding every human world. Over 10,000 ships against humanity's known fleet of 300 vessels. It should have been hopeless, but the Shadow Fleet changed everything. The crews know what they're signing up for, Harrison continued. Once they enter shadow space combat, they might not be able to return completely to normal space. The dimensional exposure changes people, makes them partially exist in both realities. It's a one-way mission, Webb added quietly. The price of wielding umbral technology is becoming like them, caught between dimensions. Despite the risks, there was no hesitation in the room. Every officer present understood what was at stake. Humanity's survival depended on technologies they barely understood, wielded by people willing to sacrifice their own humanity to protect their species. The countdown continued. In deep space, alien fleets prepared to destroy human civilization. On Earth, ancient machines powered up systems that would tear holes in reality itself. The Shadow Fleet was almost ready to emerge from the space between dimensions. When it did, the galaxy would learn that humanity had been hiding its true strength all along. The Hegemony Council was about to discover that they had awakened something that should have remained sleeping. The 72-hour deadline expired at exactly noon, Earth Standard Time. The Hegemony Council had made their decision clear hours earlier when their fleets began moving into final attack positions around every human world. Admiral Sarah Chen watched from New Geneva Station as the alien ships in her system charged their weapons. The massive vessels glowed with deadly energy, preparing to reduce the human colony to ash and vapor. She had followed her orders and maintained defensive positions, but her small fleet was about to be destroyed. All civilian transports, evacuate to the far side of the planet, she commanded. Military personnel prepare for... Space itself began to tear. The first rift opened directly between Sarah's station and the alien fleet. Reality split like fabric being cut with a knife, revealing something impossible. Through the tear, she could see another space that wasn't quite space. A dimension where light moved differently and shadows had substance. From the rift emerged a ship unlike anything in human space. It was huge, easily the size of the alien flagships, but its hull seemed to exist in multiple dimensions at once. Parts of it were solid metal. Other parts were translucent shadow. The entire vessel flickered between states of existence. Then more rifts opened. Across the Sol system, tiers in space-time appeared around Earth, Mars, the asteroid belt, and every major human installation. From each rift came ships of the Shadow Fleet, vessels that defied physics and challenged reality itself. Admiral Harrison's voice echoed across all human communication channels. This is Admiral Harrison aboard the Lazarus Rising. All Shadow Fleet vessels commence Operation Breakthrough. Show them what humanity has been hiding. The Shadow Fleet was magnificent and terrifying. 5,000 ships emerged from shadow space, each one incorporating technology that should not have existed. Cruisers that could phase through enemy fire. Destroyers that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Battleships that could fire weapons across the barriers between realities. Sarah watched in amazement as a Shadow Fleet destroyer materialized directly inside the enemy formation around New Geneva. The alien ships tried to target it, but their weapons passed through empty space. The human vessel had shifted into shadow space, becoming untouchable while still able to attack. The destroyer's guns fired, and the energy beam seemed to ignore the laws of physics. They struck alien ships from impossible angles, passing through shields as if they didn't exist. 3 enemy vessels exploded in the first volley. How are they doing that? Sarah's tactical officer asked in amazement. They're firing from shadow space into normal space, Dr. Liu explained, his voice filled with wonder. The weapons exist in multiple dimensions at once. Across human space, the Shadow Fleet was spreading through a network of dimensional rifts. Ships appeared in star systems where no human vessel should have been able to travel. The Hegemony Council's perfect encirclement was broken in minutes as humanity's hidden fleet attacked from every direction. The alien fleet around Earth found itself facing over 1,000 Shadow Fleet vessels, ships that could appear anywhere, strike without warning, and disappear before retaliation was possible. The mighty Hegemony Armada, which had seemed invincible hours before, was being torn apart by an enemy that fought like ghosts. Admiral Harrison stood on the bridge of the Lazarus Rising, watching his fleet engage the enemy. The ship around him existed partially in shadow space, giving him a view of both dimensions simultaneously. He could see the alien ships in normal space and the strange entities that lived in the Shadow Realm. All vessels maintain dimensional cohesion, he ordered. Don't drift too far into shadow space. We need to stay connected to normal reality. The warning was necessary. Shadow space was seductive. The more time a ship spent there, the harder it became to return to normal space. Some of his crew had already begun to change, their bodies adapting to exist in multiple dimensions at once. But the price was worth it. The Shadow Fleet was devastating the hegemony forces with minimal losses. Human ships that were struck by enemy fire simply phased into shadow space, allowing the attacks to pass harmlessly through them. Then they would rematerialize and continue fighting. Sarah watched the battle around New Geneva with growing excitement. The alien fleet that had threatened her colony was being systematically destroyed by ships that seemed to be everywhere at once. A Shadow Fleet cruiser would appear behind an enemy vessel, fire a devastating volley, then vanish before return fire could reach it. "Admiral," her communications officer called out, "we're receiving new orders from Earth Defense Command. All colonial forces are to support the Shadow Fleet operations." Sarah smiled for the first time since the crisis began. "All ships move to support the Shadow Fleet. Show them what conventional human forces can do when we're not outnumbered 1,000 to 1. The tide of battle was turning across the galaxy. In system after system, the Hegemony Council's fleets found themselves fighting an enemy that shouldn't have been possible. Human ships that existed in multiple dimensions, weapons that ignored shields and armor, tactics that broke every rule of space warfare. But the Shadow Protocol came with a terrible cost that was only beginning to reveal itself. Dr. Webb monitored the dimensional readings from Earth's command center. Each time a Shadow Fleet vessel phased between dimensions, it weakened the barriers that separated normal space from shadow space. The more the fleet used its abilities, the thinner those barriers became. "General Martinez," Webb called out urgently, "we're seeing massive dimensional instabilities across the battle zones. The barriers are breaking down." Martinez studied the readings. "How long before it becomes critical?" "At this rate, hours, maybe less. Every jump, every phase shift, every dimensional weapon discharge is tearing holes in reality." As if to prove his point, new contacts began appearing on the sensors. Things that weren't quite ships, weren't quite alive, but were definitely hostile. They emerged from the tiers in space-time that the Shadow Fleet was creating. Admiral Harrison was the first to encounter them. The entities appeared on the edge of his vision, visible only when he looked at them through his shadow space-enhanced senses. They were creatures of pure darkness, feeding on energy and matter indiscriminately. "All ships, we have new contacts," Harrison announced. "Unknown entities emerging from dimensional rifts. They appear to be hostile to everything." The shadow creatures attacked without discrimination. They swarmed alien ships and human vessels alike, consuming energy and leaving empty hulks behind. They seemed to exist primarily in shadow space, but could affect normal reality when they chose to. Sarah watched in horror as one of the entities consumed an alien battleship in seconds, draining all power from the massive vessel before moving on to its next victim. The creature was massive, easily the size of a space station, but it moved through space like a living shadow. "What are those things?" she asked. Dr. Liu was analyzing the sensor data. "They're coming from shadow space. Something about our dimensional activity is attracting them, or maybe releasing them." Across the galaxy, the three-way battle intensified. The Hegemony Council's fleets tried to retreat from the shadow creatures, while still fighting the human forces. The Shadow Fleet found itself caught between its mission to protect humanity and the growing threat of the entities they had accidentally released. Admiral Harrison made a command decision that would change everything. "All Shadow Fleet vessels, reduce dimensional activity to minimum levels. We're causing more damage than we realized. But it was too late. The barriers between dimensions had been too severely damaged. The shadow creatures continued to pour through the rifts, consuming everything in their path. What had started as humanity's moment of triumph was becoming a catastrophe that threatened the entire galaxy. The Hegemony Council's communication channels came alive with desperate messages. For the first time in millennia, the rulers of the galaxy were afraid. They had thought they were facing a simple rebellion. Instead, they had stumbled into something far worse. The shadow creatures were the remnants of the umbral dominion, and humanity had just given them a way back to the physical universe. The shadow creatures were everywhere now. What had started as isolated incidents across a few star systems had become a galaxy-wide plague. The entities consumed entire fleets, drained planets of their energy and left empty husks floating in space. Dr. Webb worked frantically in Earth's command center, analyzing data from across human space. The readings were worse than his worst fears. The dimensional barriers weren't just damaged, they were collapsing completely. "General Martinez," Webb called out, his voice tight with panic. "The entities aren't random creatures from shadow space. They're the Umbral Dominion, the original builders of the technology we've been using." Martinez looked up from the tactical displays showing the galaxy-wide crisis. "That's impossible. The ruins we found were millions of years old. The Umbral Dominion has been extinct for eons." "No," Webb said, pulling up his archaeological data. "They were never extinct. They were imprisoned." The holographic display showed the 17 worlds where humanity had found Umbral ruins. But now Webb's analysis revealed something that had been hidden for decades. The ruins weren't abandoned cities. They were prison complexes. "Look at the patterns," Webb explained, highlighting specific architectural features. "These aren't residential buildings or government structures. They're containment facilities, the other alien species in the galaxy. They worked together millions of years ago to trap the Umbral Dominion in shadow space." The implications were staggering. The Hegemony Council wasn't just a governing body. They were the descendants of the species that had fought and defeated the Umbral Dominion in an ancient war. The prison that held humanity's greatest enemy had been maintained for millions of years until humanity broke it. Open Admiral Harrison's voice crackled over the communication system from his position in the middle of the crisis. "Command, we need answers. These shadow creatures are consuming everything. Our dimensional weapons barely hurt them, but every time we use the technology, more of them appear." "Admiral," General Martinez responded, "we believe the entities are the original Umbral Dominion. Every time the Shadow Fleet phases between dimensions, it weakens the prison that was holding them." There was a long pause before Harrison replied, "So we've been using the keys to their cell as weapons. Perfect." Across the galaxy, the situation was deteriorating rapidly. The shadow creatures had consumed dozens of worlds, both human and alien. They seemed to grow stronger with each planet they drained, becoming larger and more aggressive. Admiral Sarah Chen found herself in command of a joint human-alien task force as the crisis forced former enemies to work together. Hegemony Council ships had arrived at New Geneva, not to attack but to coordinate a defense against the shadow creatures. "This is Captain Vex of the Hegemony ship Eternal Vigilance," came a transmission in accented but understandable human speech. "Admiral Chen, we need to talk immediately." Sarah authorized the alien captain to beam aboard her station. Captain Vex was tall and thin, with gray skin and large black eyes. His species was one she had never seen before, but he carried himself with the bearing of someone who had fought many wars. "Admiral," Vex began without preamble, "your species has made a terrible mistake. The Umbral Dominion was imprisoned for a reason. They consumed entire sectors of the galaxy before we could stop them." "We didn't know," Sarah replied. "We thought the technology was just advanced alien science." "The technology is a trap," Vex explained. "The Umbral built it to spread their influence. Every species that uses it becomes infected, becomes like them. Your Shadow Fleet crews, they're changing, aren't they?" Sarah thought about Admiral Harrison's reports. The crew members who had spent the most time in shadow space were indeed changing. Their bodies were becoming partially translucent. They could see into shadow space even when in normal reality. Some had reported that solid matter felt less real to them than the shadows. "How do we stop it?" Sarah asked. Vex's expression was grim. "The ancient prison can be rebuilt, but the cost is enormous. It requires using the same dimensional technology that created the problem, but in reverse. A massive implosion that will drag all the Umbral entities back to shadow space. What's the catch? Everything that has been exposed to the dimensional technology gets pulled in as well. Your Shadow Fleet, your crews, anyone who has been changed by prolonged exposure to shadow space. They become the prison guards, trapped forever between dimensions." The conversation was interrupted by emergency alerts from across the sector. The shadow creatures were organizing, moving in coordinated groups toward populated systems. They had consumed enough energy to begin acting intelligently. Dr. Webb's voice came over the communication system with new information that made everything worse. "Admiral Chen, we're detecting massive energy buildups in the Shadow Realm. The entities are preparing something big. If I'm reading this correctly, they're trying to tear a permanent hole between dimensions." That would mean the end of everything. The shadow creatures would no longer be limited to the energy they could steal through small rifts. They would have unlimited access to the physical universe. Sarah looked at Captain Vex. How long do we have? Hours, maybe less, the alien replied. The Umbral Dominion learns fast. Once they stabilize a permanent gateway, they'll spread across the galaxy in days. The decision was made for them when Admiral Harrison's voice came over the fleet communication channels. He was broadcasting to every human ship and every Hegemony Council vessel simultaneously. All forces, this is Admiral Harrison aboard the Lazarus Rising. We've just received word about the true nature of what we're fighting. The Shadow Fleet has been analyzing the situation and we've reached a conclusion. Sarah could hear the weight of command in his voice, the knowledge of what had to be done. The dimensional prison can be rebuilt, Harrison continued, but it requires a permanent sacrifice. The Shadow Fleet was designed to use Umbral technology. We're already partially integrated with Shadow Space. We can serve as the new prison guards. There was a pause as the implications sank in across the galaxy. 5,000 ships and their crews were volunteering to be trapped forever between dimensions. This is not a death sentence, Harrison added. We'll continue to exist in Shadow Space, preventing the Umbral Dominion from breaking free again. But we won't be able to return to normal reality. Captain Vex looked at Sarah with something that might have been respect. Your species continues to surprise us. Even facing extinction, you find a way to take responsibility for your mistakes. Sarah activated her communication system. Admiral Harrison, this is Admiral Chen. The colonial forces stand ready to support whatever action you deem necessary. Similar messages came in from human commanders across the galaxy. Despite the impossible choice, despite the cost, humanity was ready to do what had to be done. But the shadow creatures had other plans. The Umbral Dominion had spent millions of years trapped in shadow space, and they had learned patience. They had also learned how to fight back. The assault began simultaneously across dozens of star systems. The shadow creatures abandoned their random feeding and launched coordinated attacks on the largest concentrations of human and alien ships. They had realized that the combined fleets posed a threat to their freedom. The final battle for the galaxy was about to begin. The final battle began when the shadow creatures stopped running and started hunting. Across the galaxy, the entities that had been randomly consuming energy suddenly organized into a coordinated assault. They had learned that the combined human and alien fleets posed a threat to their freedom. Admiral Harrison watched from the bridge of the Lazarus Rising as massive shadow creatures surrounded his position near Earth. These weren't the smaller entities they had been fighting. These were the true Umbral Dominion, beings the size of moons, with intelligence that spanned millions of years of imprisonment. All Shadow Fleet vessels, Harrison commanded, prepare for final dimensional shift. We're going to implement the prison protocol. Dr. Webb's calculations showed that the plan could work. By reversing the dimensional technology and creating a massive implosion in shadow space, they could drag all the Umbral entities back to their prison. But every human ship that had been exposed to the dimensional technology would be pulled in as well. Earth itself presented the biggest problem. The polar facilities had been generating dimensional energy for hours. The entire planet was saturated with shadow space radiation. 3 billion people had been exposed to levels that would make them partially exist in both dimensions. Sir, Webb reported from Earth's command center, the exposure levels are too high. If we activate the prison protocol from Earth's surface, the entire population will be pulled into shadow space. General Martinez studied the readings. The choice was horrible but clear. Save Earth's population and let the Umbral Dominion escape to consume the galaxy, or sacrifice humanity's homeworld to protect everyone else. But Admiral Harrison had spent his entire career finding third options when faced with impossible choices. Dr. Webb, Harrison called over the communication channel. What if we don't anchor the implosion on Earth? What if the Shadow Fleet becomes the anchor point instead? Webb ran rapid calculations. It could work. If the Shadow Fleet positions itself in a specific formation in shadow space, you could create the implosion from inside the dimension. The fleet would become a permanent seal, but Earth's population would be safe. The shadow creatures seemed to sense the threat. They abandoned their attacks on other targets and converged on the Shadow Fleet positions. Dozens of the massive entities surrounded Earth, trying to prevent the human fleet from implementing their plan. Admiral Sarah, Chen led the conventional human forces in a desperate defense of the Shadow Fleet. Her ships couldn't hurt the shadow creatures directly, but they could provide covering fire while the Shadow Fleet prepared for their final mission. All colonial forces, Sarah commanded, form defensive perimeter around Shadow Fleet vessels. We need to buy them time to get into position. The Hegemony Council fleets joined the defense. Captain Vex's ship Eternal Vigilance moved alongside Sarah's flagship. Alien and human weapons firing together against the shadow creatures. Admiral Chen, Vex called over the communication channel. My people want you to know that we misjudged humanity. You could have used this crisis to conquer the galaxy, but instead you're sacrificing yourselves to save it. Sarah watched as one of her destroyers was consumed by a shadow creature, drained of all energy in seconds. We're not doing this to be heroes, Captain. We're doing it because it's our mess to clean up. The Shadow Fleet began their final transformation. 5,000 ships started moving into shadow space permanently, their hulls becoming translucent as they shifted between dimensions. The crews were changing too, their bodies adapting to exist primarily in shadow space. Admiral Harrison could feel the change happening to himself. His vision now showed both dimensions simultaneously. The physical universe looked distant and dreamlike, while shadow space felt more real with each passing moment. All Shadow Fleet personnel, he announced. Final systems check. Once we complete the formation, there's no going back. We'll exist in shadow space permanently, but we'll be protecting both dimensions from the Umbral Dominion. The response came from 5,000 ships across the galaxy. Crews that had volunteered for a mission they knew would transform them forever. People who had chosen duty over their own humanity. Shadow Fleet stands ready. Admiral, came the unified response. The formation was complex, requiring precise positioning in shadow space to create the dimensional implosion. Ships had to be placed at specific points where the barriers between dimensions were thinnest. Each vessel would become a permanent anchor, holding the prison seal in place. As the Shadow Fleet moved into final position, the shadow creatures launched their most desperate attack. The largest entity, a being that dwarfed entire solar systems, focused its attention on the Lazarus Rising. It had identified Harrison as the key to the operation. The creature's attack came from multiple dimensions simultaneously. Energy beams that existed in shadow space and normal space at the same time struck the flagship. The Lazarus Rising shuddered under the assault, its dimensional shields flickering. Hull breach on Deck 7, reported Harrison's tactical officer, whose body was now partially translucent. We're losing atmosphere to shadow space. All hands, emergency dimensional shift, Harrison ordered. Full transition to shadow space now. The Lazarus Rising completed its transformation, becoming a ghost ship that existed primarily in shadow space, but could still affect normal reality. Around it, the other Shadow Fleet vessels made the same transition. The formation was complete. Dr. Webb, Harrison called to Earth, initiate prison protocol. All Shadow Fleet vessels are in position. Webb's hands shook as he activated the ancient umbral technology one final time. But instead of opening rifts, the machinery began to collapse them. The barriers between dimensions started to strengthen, pulling the shadow creatures back toward their prison. The Umbral Dominion fought desperately against the pull. The massive entities used every bit of energy they had consumed to resist the dimensional implosion, but the Shadow Fleet held their formation, becoming living anchors that prevented escape. It's working, Webb reported from Earth. The entities are being pulled back to shadow space. The dimensional barriers are stabilizing. One by one, the shadow creatures disappeared from normal space. The largest entity, the one that had attacked Harrison directly, made one final attempt to break free. It focused all its remaining energy on destroying the Lazarus Rising. Harrison watched as the creature's attack approached his ship from multiple dimensions. There was no way to avoid it, no way to survive it, but survival wasn't the point anymore. Shadow Fleet, he announced calmly, mission accomplished. The prison holds. The creature's attack struck the flagship and consumed it completely, but Harrison's sacrifice strengthened the dimensional seal. Where the Lazarus Rising had been, a permanent barrier formed that would prevent the Umbral Dominion from ever breaking free again. The battle was over. The shadow creatures were gone, pulled back to their prison in shadow space. The dimensional barriers were stable again. The galaxy was safe. Admiral Sarah Chen received the final transmission from the Shadow Fleet just before they completed their transformation. It came from Admiral Harrison's second-in-command, now the senior officer of the Ghost Fleet. Admiral Chen, this is Acting Admiral Torres of the Shadow Fleet. The prison protocol is complete. The Umbral Dominion is sealed. We'll be maintaining watch from shadow space to ensure they never escape again. Sarah looked at her tactical display. The Shadow Fleet still appeared on sensors, but faintly, like echoes of ships rather than the vessels themselves. They existed now in the space between dimensions, eternal guardians protecting the galaxy from an ancient evil. Captain Vex's ship moved alongside Sarah's flagship. Admiral, the Hegemony Council has asked me to extend an offer. Humanity will be given full membership in the galactic community. After what we've witnessed, we want your species as allies, not subjects. Sarah thought about everything that had happened. The crisis had started with humanity facing extinction. It ended with them saving the galaxy at the cost of their greatest military achievement. Tell the Council we accept, she replied, but with conditions. The Shadow Fleet's sacrifice must never be forgotten. They're still out there, still protecting us. They deserve to be remembered as the heroes they are. Years later, monuments would be built on every human world to honor the Shadow Fleet. Children would learn about the ships that sailed between dimensions, crewed by people who gave up their humanity to save the galaxy. And sometimes, on quiet nights when the barriers between dimensions grew thin, people reported seeing ghost ships in the darkness. The Shadow Fleet, still on patrol, still keeping watch, still protecting the galaxy from threats that existed beyond normal space. The message was always the same when detected by sensitive equipment. Shadow Fleet maintains the watch. All is well. Humanity had found its place in the galaxy not as conquerors but as guardians. The species that had accidentally unleashed an ancient evil had also found the courage to make the ultimate sacrifice to contain it again. The hidden fleet had emerged, saved the galaxy, and became legend.